This is HighIntensityBusiness.com with Lawrence Neal, helping you achieve your health and fitness goals. Become a great personal trainer and build your high-intensity strength training business.
Lawrence Neal here, and welcome back to HighIntensityBusiness.com. Today's guest is Joe Cirulli. Joe is the founder and CEO of Gainesville Health and Fitness, otherwise known as GHF. Joe has led life focused on two things: helping people become healthy and building an inspiring, thriving company culture. Never wavering in his visional efforts despite adversity, from working for companies that went bankrupt to living on his last 12 cents in his car, Joe's quest has always been to inspire human potential. At 24, he started Gainesville Health and Fitness with only $1,700. Today, GHF is one of the most well-known and respected health clubs in the entire world. Joe owns 3 clubs currently with more than 27,000 members, a 28,000 square foot club in the heart of Gainesville, a 25,000 square foot club in the Tioga Town Center, and a 14,000 square foot women-only center in Thornbrook Village. 2018 marked the 40th year of business for GHF. Congratulations. And Joe also shares ownership of 2 rehabilitation centers, Request Physical Therapy and Request Physical Therapy at Tioga with North Florida Regional Medical Center. He employs over 400 people among his Gainesville Health and Fitness centers and Request Physical Therapy locations. Joe, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you. I think the one center is 80,000. I don't know if it was listed as 28,000, but the main center is 80,000 square feet.
Oh yeah, it was 78,000. I said, I think so. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for the correction. Good. So thank you for doing this. Been excited to talk to you for a while now. A lot of people really been excited about you, coming on the show. And, I in preparation for this, I was watching some of your previous podcasts and interviews on YouTube, and your talk, My Last 12 Cents, is so inspiring. I mean, the amount of challenges you faced as a young man trying to build your business, the amount of failures you had and mistakes and things you had to overcome is unbelievable. And my first question to you really is I will point the listeners to that speech you gave, because I don't want to necessarily repeat the entire thing here, because I think it'd be good to talk about some new stuff. But I think it's amazing. So I encourage people to watch that. And I'll link to it in the show notes for this and the blog. But I'm just really curious. Do you think if it weren't for all the hardship you went through, and you went through some serious challenges, that you would be as successful as you are now?
Well, first of all, I never look at success as a place you get to. I always look at it as a course that you're on. And the answer to the question is I don't know. The things that occurred were just the things that occurred. Where I was very fortunate was there was nothing else I wanted to do. So it wasn't like there was this other alternative that, well, if this doesn't work, I'll go to that, because there was no second place for me. And so by that, I'm just saying there was no choice. And the thing that helped me so much was I never stopped reading. I never stopped listening to tapes on how our mind worked and how I could convince myself that I could work through anything that I was facing at any time. And I mean, I read a lot, and I would read about people who went through the most miserable of times and how they made their way through it. And I'd look at it and I says, man, I just got a temporary problem. But every time a company went out of business, I looked at it like, I know a year's worth of stuff that I didn't know a year ago. And if I just quit now, if there ever was an alternative, I said I would lose what I already gained. And then I would look at it after the second one went bankrupt, and the third one went bankrupt, and the fourth one went bankrupt, and just on. And I just kept saying, I've learned so much. Why would I want to lose it? Because I've always seen people who would, like, every year and a half or 2 years, they change jobs. They'd get a completely different job. And I'd look at it and say, how could you ever become great in anything if you just keep shifting all the time? So I looked at it as an advantage that I had, not a disadvantage that I had.
So you mentioned you didn't have any other option. But in a way you did, right? Because your other option would have been quote unquote a normal job. But had you already started reading all this stuff, a lot of the positive attitude stuff, positive psychology that you've talked about prior to coming to that realization? Or was that just, already innate for you? That kind of mentality of, well, there is no plan B,
Well, the first thing is there was just total luck in me even being aware that there were books out there that could really help focus the way you think and understand the potential that you have. And when I say it was just luck, I mean, I opened up the drawer one day and there was this book in there and it was called The Power of Positive Thinking. And I read it and it just captivated me because, see, I always had a mindset of what life was supposed to be like based upon the life that I grew up with. And I thought that's what it was until I read that book and thought, wow, there could be so much more. You just have to think of so much more. And that was the beginning of it. And then when I went through challenging times, I thought maybe I better go find another book. And I'd go find another book. And it just always happened to be the right book at the right time. However all that works, it works. And so that was the thing that just kept me going. No matter what situation I was going through, I kept reading new books on how to think. And then I started listening to tapes all the time in my car. And just to have some great philosophers talk about life and human potential and all, and those were the things that just kept me going the whole time. And yeah, was I offered other jobs? Of course. But when I say there was no second choice, there was absolutely nothing else that I wanted to do. I mean, this has been like a focal point of my life since I was a little kid. And I just realized it all kind of came together when I started seeing what the health club industry was. And then realizing that the reason why all those clubs went out of business was not because there was anything wrong with what you did inside of the fitness center. It was just the people that I work for. Their supreme focus was on just sales and money. I realized that if you took care of the people, the sales and the money would eventually take care of itself. And it's always proved true for me, always.
One of the things you mentioned earlier was you read about people who had gone through worse things than you, which gave you the motivation and inspiration to overcome your current challenge. A book that comes to mind would be, because I have had a similar experience. So the book for me would be Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. You read that and you're like, well, I've got it easy, right? But I'm just curious, what stories or books, what was the specific ones where you were like, well, that's way worse than my situation?
Well, the truth of the matter is, in most of the books I would have, I read at that time, you would read about people who went through really, really difficult times. But I think one of the books when I was going through a real difficult time, when I actually thought about quitting for about 5 minutes, and I realized, I asked myself the question, what am I going to do? And so the book that I found on the shelf was called, after I read The Power of Positive Thinking, was The Amazing Results of Positive Thinking. And that book, when I started reading it, it was just story after story after story of people who went through the most miserable times. And I'd read it and say, I don't have a problem. That guy had a problem. It's a problem with my attitude. I just need to change the way I think. And I did. Even though I hated where I was at, I didn't like living in the town I was living in. Nothing. My life consisted of working all day, working out at night, going back to the Holiday Inn, going to sleep, getting up in the morning, come back to work day after day after day. And obviously that's not exactly the way I wanted to live my life, but I didn't even like where I was living it. But I let myself get kind of down because of it. And that book made me realize, man, just change the way you think. I just convinced myself I liked where I was and everything was good, because everything was good. It was just a place I didn't want to be, but I knew I wouldn't be there the rest of my life. So like I said, there are many stories.
That's awesome. Makes me think of I remember reading a story about Thomas Edison when I believe his factory burnt down. He had no insurance, because they didn't think that apparently the material with which they built the factory wasn't supposed to be flammable or something like that. And, he lost his entire business and he let it get him down for maybe an hour or so, and then he got his family outside to watch the fireworks, to enjoy the blazing inferno. And then he went, I think over the next few weeks, he rebuilt, or months, he rebuilt the factory and had like the most profitable year ever. Which,
yeah, for sure. For sure. And that's always the way that it works. You just got to think about things. You just got to think about things differently when you're going through those challenging times. I mean, think about it. He developed the phonograph. He was deaf. You know, if you knew that or not. But if you go down to Fort Myers, where, you know, his home is, you'll see his original phonograph. And you know what you'll see all over the phonograph? Teeth marks. Because he had to bite it so he could hear the music vibrating through the bones in his ear. You know, you know, people have challenges. You know, and as I've said a million times, the most important thing you got in your life is your health. And if you got your health, you can overcome anything. And if you don't overcome your health, I promise you, the most important thing in your life will be your health. And so stay healthy. And like I said, you have opportunities to do anything that you decide you want to do.
Yeah, I feel obviously personal training business is a challenging business. I mean, any business is challenging, but I almost feel like in this industry, it's almost like a rite of passage to have hard times, you know, because you learn so much, and it teaches you what you can overcome, and you build courage in overcoming these obstacles, and you get more and more, just that resilience just grows over time. One of the stories you told during your My Last 12 Cents talk, which I just love that talk, and I really encourage people to go and check that out. And I'll keep saying it during this podcast because I think it's so valuable. But one of the things you said, you talked about how you, at one stage, you had a location, but you were like right up against it in terms of financing it. You were having builders in, building stuff, and whilst it was all going on, you were trying to get members. And I just thought to myself, how the hell could you convince people to join when it sounds like you had a building site going on at the same time, if I've understood that correctly? So can you take us back there and talk about how you were able to convince people to join when it doesn't sound like you really had much of a gym at the time?
Well, you know, it's funny because so many of those clubs went bankrupt in the town I'm currently in. When people first joined, I mean, their concern was you're going to go bankrupt because all the health clubs went bankrupt. And this is how I'd actually sell you a membership, Lawrence. I say, okay, look, at the way we'll set it up is your dues are X amount of dollars a month. Now, there's no initial payment that you have to make, and your dues won't start for 30 days from today. That way, if we go out of business, you're already ahead of the game. And that's how I'd have to sell a membership. Because think about it. I'm going to give you the next 30 days. You're not even paying for it. If I go bankrupt in the next 30 days, you worked out and haven't paid anything. So I was always a month behind, so you never had to feel concerned about losing your money. And I would never ask people to pay cash. You know, so that's just the way it was. I mean, I knew that I wasn't going to go out. I mean, I knew I wasn't going to go out of business. There was, you know, when you said about Thomas Edison being depressed for an hour, I was once depressed for 3 hours. And then at the end of 3 hours, I realized I was never going to get anywhere being depressed. So I stayed up all night thinking and working and planning. And then the next day, you know, went through and made the changes that I came up with the night before and was able to work my way through
it. In the same, sorry, go on, Joe. What were you going to say?
Oh, no, go ahead.
Yeah. In the same presentation, you talked about goal setting, and you talked about how you you had goals, right? I want to earn 100 grand by X, and all these things, and it sounded like you realized that they weren't necessarily realistic goals, and so you cut them down in order to make them a little bit more achievable. And that really resonated with me, if I've understood that correctly, because I found for myself, if I set goals that are too crazy, I find it very demotivating when I get close and realize there's no way that's possible. And so by actually making it a stretch goal, not easily attainable, but not impossible, something that's actually realistic, it's far more motivational. And I'd like to just hear what your advice to guys and girls in high intensity training business who are setting goals for their business. What sort of advice would you give on that?
Well, first of all, I don't know if it's just for those people, but it's for people who are living a life. They can decide where they want their life to go. And it actually, when I put together my list when I was 21, it was after I had read the book, The Power of Positive, Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, which just inspired me. And that's when I started making out my list. Now, actually, I would not say they weren't stretch goals because they were. The difference with them, I think there was only one thing on there where I put a time frame. All right. And it was the one you brought up. I mean, to own my own health club in Gainesville, Florida, so no one's going to tell me where I'm going to live. I didn't know when that would ever happen, right? To make it respected in the Gainesville community, because as I said, so many went bankrupt. I didn't know when that would happen. I put down to become a pilot, travel all over the world, travel all over America to buy a home on the ocean and the mountains and build my parents a home. I put all these things on there, but I didn't have time frames. Like I said, the only thing I put on there was the fourth or fifth thing on that list was to make $100,000 by the time I was 25. Now you got to understand, this was right after I had been living in my car. So that was a pretty good, that was a pretty good goal. But that particular thing is what made me realize I could do anything. And I'll explain to you what I meant by that. I started my own health club when I was 24 and a half. I started with the $1,700. I advertised like crazy. I hired all these people to build a place. I didn't have no money to pay any of them. But somehow each week I got enough money in from people who were looking at, wanting a membership when it was open, that I was able to keep everybody going. But the day that I turned 26 years old, I had exactly $100,000 in my savings account. Now, understand it went from $1,700 to $100,000. When I saw that number, I could tell you what went through my head. I said, it's amazing. I said, it wasn't 99. It wasn't 101. It was the exact number I wrote down. And when I saw that, I said, I can do anything. I can do anything I put my mind to. Because, see, I always believed in everything I read, right? Because they were the masters. And I always believed in what I read. I think that just even showed me more. Like Heaven Health Club was the number one thing on the list. That was a times, quote, sensitive thing on my list. But I'll tell you, I mean, it's not like I had total confidence because when I was 21, I made about $10,000. When I was 22, I made about $10,500. When I was 23, I made $11,000, but I was still reading my list. And when I was 23, I put a line through 100,000 and I put 60,000. I didn't know how I was going to do that either. But then that next year, I read the book Laws of Success, which was also by Napoleon Hill. And I realized when I was done that I had just copped out. Everything said you're just supposed to believe it. So I actually put a line back through 60,000 and put 100,000, not having a clue how I would do it. But when I saw that it happened, that's all I needed to see. And that was 100%. Just do whatever you believe you can do and just keep moving forward. And I always have.
Yeah, so inspiring. So was it 100,000, not even with 100,000 10 cents? It was spot on 100,000?
100,000 in the bank.
That's it's quite strange that happened. So I guess I wanted to kind of shift gears slightly on the business front. Is you've built this awesome business, this health club, and now one I guess main health club, and then two kind of small health clubs, which are still significant. A lot of people listening to this run small hit studios, right? So maybe 1,500, 2,000 square feet, that kind of thing. Maybe they've got one, maybe they've got several, or they're looking to open multiple locations. I'd love to hear your view on what's the difference in running an organization like yours, or some of the key differences versus running a typical high-intensity studio, in your opinion?
Well, I think I have a little bit of experience in kind of all of it. In my clubs, we offer personal training. In my main center, we have about a 5,000 square foot area for personal training. In my smaller club, it's about 1,000 feet. And the main thing with that is, with us, obviously, we're dealing with members getting involved in personal training. So the big issue is obviously marketing to the members to make them aware. The other part of it is that the trainers are also responsible for marketing. Before that even occurs, though, you got to make sure you got the right trainers, right? Because you aren't going to grow it. if you don't have the right people. So now you have to backtrack even more. And that is, what's your hiring process? Now, I'm going to take even before your hiring process. Before you can come together and build a strong hiring process, you have to know who you are. You have to know what are the values that you believe in. You know, what is the culture that's inside your organization. So like I said, you got to keep going backward and backward and backward. So probably one of the most important things that we ever did was I thought it would take about 8 hours to define our vision and our mission and our core values and our core purpose and our culture, and even talk about what the future was going to be for the company, just like I did it for myself. It was interesting because I knew the things inside my own head. But one day I just asked myself a question. I said, I know these are inside my head, but does everybody else understand what it's all about? Do they understand it by osmosis? You know, or should I maybe get a solid group of 8 people and go sit down and let's talk about it? So I took 8 people away. And we sat down and started going through everything. Now, I thought it would take 8 hours. It took 6 months of constantly working on it and working on it, working on it. What was great, what was so helpful to me was, if you know who Jim Collins is, Jim Collins, the author from Good to Great and Great by Choice. Well, it was funny. Back in 1998, I read an article in the Harvard Business Review. It was called Building Your Company's Culture, or Building Your Company's Vision. And I read it. And it talked about all these things. And as I went through it, I kept saying, I know that, I know that, I understand that, I understand that. And that's when I finished. I said, I understand it. I wonder if everybody in my company understands it. And that's what led to the discussions. And the discussions got very, very deep. And when I say 6 months, every week, the 8 of us kept working on it and working on it and working on it. Now, back then, I only had 200 employees. So what I did was, once we finished everything, I said, you know, this isn't going to do any good if it's only us 8 that believe it. I said, so let's have 2 meetings. So we arranged 2 meetings of 100 people each, broke them up into 10 groups of 10. We had them dissect everything that we had come up with. We got their thoughts, their ideas, and then we made little corrections, had a meeting again with the second group, and then when I say perfected it, we got down to this is who we are as a company. Now, once that was all defined, then we said, now let's design our hiring process. So we find the people who fit inside of our organization. So that led into the redesign of our whole hiring process. And that's probably the biggest thing that we did. Now, the reason I bring up Jim Collins is, when I was reading the book Good to Great, I go, boy, I recognize that name. And I went back through and I realized he had written that article in the Harvard Business Review, because I didn't pay attention to the name until 6 years later, 7 years later. But that was probably the beginning point. Now, once obviously we had that set up, we started getting the right people. I always had good people. I mean, I'm very fortunate. I have people with me who've been with me 30, 35, 40 years. And I don't know how many companies have people who've been with them that long, and they all work hard, and they all still believe in the same things that got us going originally. And so I'm very, very fortunate, in that area. But in the development of the personal training, the most critical thing, obviously, is, after you get the right people, is marketing what you do and learning everything you can about marketing, learning everything you can about how to tell the story about what it is you do. That's critical. Now, not only do I have the personal training centers, but I have 2 boutique studios, and it's high intensity training. I'm in Gainesville, Florida. I have one down by Clearwater, Florida, which is about 3 hours from Gainesville, and one in Tampa that's about 2.5 hours. And all we do is high-intensity strength training in those locations. We use very specialized equipment. We don't use the traditional equipment. But the whole program is built upon research that we did back in 2012 with Ellington Darden. I'm sure you know Ellington Darden. And, we've written, I think, 18 books so far out of the center. All of them built upon the premise of high-intensity training, building muscle to lose body fat. And with the research we did on the machines that we're currently using, I mean, the amazing thing is, in 2/3 the amount of time and 2/3 the number of workouts, we got 50% greater results. and it's all built around negative training. So it's a process. And once again, to backtrack a little bit, what got me going to even try that concept of high intensity training and developing a program instead of just advertising pretty much we can do anything, with you as a personal trainer. It was a very, very specific program about building muscle to lose body fat. As a matter of fact, the tagline on it is, the name of it's called X-Force Body, and the tagline is leaner, stronger, healthier. And so with Ellington back in 2012, we did the research on the machines. We followed the same type meal plans that we had followed before. And as I said, got these dramatic results. Now, I'll backtrack a little bit before that. In 2011, I read a book called The New Rules of Retail, and it talked about the challenges health clubs were going to have with it was talking about the challenges department stores were having with all the boutique studios that were being developed. And, when I looked at that, I said, man, we're going to have the same challenges ourselves, which led to a major renovation of our clubs. Took 6 years to finish.
What kinds of challenges are you alluding to?
Well, what I was looking at was all the boutique studios that were being developed that could take members away. All right. Just like even in personal training, there's lots of studios that are around that could take away customers from personal training. There could be a CrossFit studio that takes your people away. I mean, there could be all kinds of things. My goal as a fitness center was to prepare for that. And because when they talked about the department stores, they were talking about the Lululemons and all these other stores that were being developed that were taking their customers away. So with us, it led to us really revamping and building onto all the different areas of the club so that we have cycling areas, personal training areas, X-Force areas, tribe areas, Pilates areas, CrossFit areas. And what I tried to do is this. Say, look at, first of all, if we're going to lose any customers, let's lose them to us. Let's lose them to something else, that we offer. So what I'm getting to is like with the personal training is they've got to constantly reinvent themselves. They can't just be the same thing now and that they were 10 years from now. They need to look at what kind of specialties that they can develop inside of their centers. Those are the kind of things we look at.
Just on that, I wanted to challenge you on that, because if you look at, and maybe I misunderstood this, so correct me if I'm wrong. But if you look at Discover Strength, Luke's made and I know you and Luke know each other pretty well, and Luke's made obviously a mission to focus on strength training, focus on being evidence-based, and has not really decided to add anything too different to that in his portfolio. You look at and they've got 5 locations now, and you look at the Perfect Workout, another example, who just stick to super slow strength training, who have almost 70 locations. So are you saying that you reckon that those organizations would need to provide more variety in order to grow or survive in the long term? Is that what you're saying, or do you think, yeah?
Let me explain it maybe a little bit better. If you have a set program that you brand and you say we're the best in the world at doing this, and you get that brand out there and you can market it and push it, I'd say go with it, because I'm going to tell you, my boutique studios that are 3,000 square feet, we market a program built around high intensity strength training. Okay. That's all that we do. Inside the fitness center, there's such a variety of members who need different things. All right. So that you may have members who have Parkinson's disease. You may have patient or members who are so inflexible it's affecting them. So we develop the different programs for that. So what Luke has done, and he's done a great job, is he has branded himself as that center. Exactly the same we're doing the X-Force centers. We're branding it built around a program of fat loss, built around strength training, and I'm not adding anything. That's what I'm not trying to do. So it depends on the type, quote, membership you have if you're inside a club. If you're outside a club, the most important thing you have to do is make sure you're not the same as every other personal training center in town. There has to be something about you that makes you remarkable. that nobody else has. So that's the challenge, is figuring out what it is.
Got it. Okay. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about high intensity training specifically. I think this is a nice segue to do that. You've been into HIIT for forever, right? Talk to me about your relationship with high intensity training. When did it start for you?
Well, it's funny. Back in 1979, I started hearing this stuff about Nautilus, and I was hearing more and more about Nautilus. And I had trained on free weights my whole life. I had two buddies that I trained with. We would train for 3 hours a night, 5 to 6 days a week. So I thought, well, let me go learn. At least let me be open to learning. So I set an appointment to go down to Nautilus, and there were 3 of us. And I remember there were 9 other guys. And so they start talking about strength training. And as I'm listening to it, I'm realizing, I'm saying, I never thought about that before. I never thought about the point of taking a muscle to a point of failure. And if you don't take it to a point of failure, why does the muscle have to grow anyway? You can already do it. And it just was making sense to me. Well, one of my buddies who actually competed, he said, hey, listen, if your stuff is so good, why don't you take me through a workout? And I said to Eric, I wouldn't be so cocky if I were you. And so anyway, a little while later, he said it again. And they go, we'll get somebody. Sure, go ahead and change your clothes and come on back. So that's when, I don't know if you know Jim Flanagan, but that's when Jim Flanagan, who worked there, he came out and they took Eric through a workout. I've never seen anything like it. I'd never seen anything like it in my life. And it was high intensity. And after the 4th machine, he was on the ground. He couldn't even stand up. And I remember looking and go, I need to get these machines. So anyway, I ended up getting 7 machines that represented about 9 or 10 exercises, because some of the machines back then were compound. I got them pretty quick because somebody's order fell through or whatever. So I got the machines 2 weeks later, and I set them up, in the high intensity order. And Eric and I started training on it. And it took me a month before I could get to the end and stand up. And when I did, I remember I called Jim Flanagan and said, hey, Jim, I want to come down there. You mind taking me through a workout? And he said, no, come on down. So I went down there, and he took me through a high-intensity workout. But see, I already worked my way through it, so I could take it all. And I think he got me to 16 machines because he kept trying to put me down. And at the end, he goes, that's good enough. And I made it, no problems. I was still standing up. The irony to it was 30 minutes later, I was taking a shower, and I turned the water on. It hit me in the head. All I remember was hitting the back wall and hitting the ground. So I had a delayed effect, from it. But I, when I first opened, that's all I really had was high intensity training. I didn't have all the things that in our centers that we have today. And people have a hard time believing this, but there was a starting point. I had instructors lined up all the way down the line. People would wait 2 hours before they got to the starting point. And then I expanded. I added another line. We got it down to about an hour and 15 minutes. Then I expanded again, and we got it down to about 45 minutes. And I kept adding lines to it so that we could keep getting the people through, faster and faster. And that was the beginning of it. And my clubs in the beginning, that's all high intensity training, and we still do it. We still have it set up the same way. The only difference is now, inside our clubs, we have lots of things to offer. So that's why we could grow we're just a little under 28,000 members. That's how we could do it, because we offer group training, group exercise. We have pools, basketball courts, everything. But I still have the circuits set up the same way I had the circuits back then, because there's so many people who don't understand how to train. And I think it's important that we teach them. Now, on the circuits in the club, it's not one-on-one. We have instructors that work, with a bunch of different people. X-Force, it's all one-on-one, high intensity, like you imagine, high intensity strength training, which I still believe in, and I still do.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm going to ask some questions about that in a moment, but I'm just very curious. Do you ever, I appreciate the rationale for expanding your services as you have, I think. But do you ever feel in conflict? Because I'm sure, like anyone who's in high intensity training, you know that HIIT is so beneficial and there's so many other exercise, quote unquote, exercise protocols that have no place, right? So do you ever feel in conflict with, offering this array of services when it might not be necessary for improving someone's health? Or do you disagree with that? Or how do you feel about that?
No, not at all. I mean, I still train that same way. Believe in it 100%. When you start getting thousands and thousands of people a day, coming into the center, it's not always the same. Most people, when they have access to everything, do not train as hard as they possibly can. But the difference is this, that if I want to be able to help a variety of people who prefer doing a variety of things, it gives me the opportunity to do that. Well, I still can stick with my core beliefs. Well, I can still train people that I help and work out with me through that entire program, through all the high intensity training. But once again, you got a lot of people we have tons of people who are 60, 70, 80, some 90 years old. The pool works for them, right? All the pool exercises work for them. And then the goal is to get them to work hard in the pool, with the different classes, that we have. So I've just come to understand there's just different types of people. Everybody's not like me. Everybody's not like is going to get there and just, when I can't do the next one, I'm going to try to do the next one anyway. It doesn't matter. But if I tried to do that to everybody that's just a member of the center, I would terrify them if they ever came back. Most people that I train will never come back and say, would you do it again? So that's what the difference is. We can do it for those that want to do it, but still offer an array of services for people who aren't into that exactly.
Do you ever find, I'm very curious about whether you use these other services because people are more interested in them initially as almost like a gateway drug for high intensity training. So do you get a percentage of people who come for the swimming or come for CrossFit or come for fill in the blank, and then you kind of upsell or cross sell them into that? Does that happen?
Yeah, the answer is yes. And the word is you just keep educating them. You just keep educating. You send them information. You just keep making them aware of the benefits of strength training. Because do I know that's the most important thing? Absolutely. Absolutely. Do I know that most people, when they get older, their biggest problems aren't heart issue and lung issue and all their biggest problems are orthopedic issues. People have a hard time standing up. People have a hard time not falling when they're walking. So I get to use that entire concept with my boutique centers because as we talked earlier, that's all that we do in there. And once again, I wouldn't have opened the boutique centers if I didn't 100% believe in that. But with the growth of the facilities, we offer all kinds of programming in the center. There's a number of people who come in that over time you can say, it'd probably be beneficial for you to start doing the strength training. But, and Lawrence, I'm sure you know this too, that the biggest part of the population is not into that much pain, where we can take it and we're looking for those people who are willing to give 30 minutes to become the best that they can become. We're great, but there's probably not too many personal training studios that have 28,000 members, because that's not what you're looking for. At my X-Force centers where that's what we do, 200. That's all we want in that program is 200 people, working out each week. And that's twice a week for most of the workouts take 20 minutes, not 30 minutes. But it depends on which audience I'm working with. Health Club, it's more general. Those programs, very, very specific because we tell them. We tell them when the introductory session, when we say, listen, come and learn about it before you tell. Some people come, well, I want to sign up and get in your program. Say, you can't yet. You have to go through the presentation so you understand what it is and what we're expecting out of you. Because if you're not willing to give it everything you got, it ain't going to work like it should work. So totally believe in that. Totally believe in it.
Awesome. So, I would be told off if I didn't ask this question on behalf of Luke. He said that Wayne Westcott trained you or trained with you, and he said you're the strongest pound for pound person he's ever seen, and said you train incredibly hard. So I'd love to hear about your current workouts at the moment.
Well, the current workouts are basically using the X-Force equipment, and if you're not familiar with that, it's Arthur Jones always talked about negative training, back from the 70s. And he tried to develop machinery for doing it, and he could do it with a computer, but he didn't like that at all. So he never really moved on, with that. He developed, you may or may not be familiar with a line of Omni machines, where you could work your upper body by using your lower body to lift the weights and your upper body to lower the weights. Obviously, you could do training with people where you have two guys lift the weight for you and you lower the weight. But with the X-Force equipment, you both lift it and lower it. So if you lift 100 pounds, you lower 140 pounds. And it's a weight stack, and it happens instantaneously by the weight stack flipping. And so that's how we train, my buddies and I. That's how we do it. And so we still do it. I said high intensity fashion, still go until you can't go, anymore. I train twice a week, and that's pretty much, how we do it. I'll do cardio a couple times a week. I walk 14 or 15,000 steps, a day. I don't ever want to put on fat on my body. I just want to stay as strong as I can possibly stay. And that's always been the goal. Strength is very, very important to me. I don't know how a person, especially a guy, cannot go through life being as strong as he can be. I don't know where you get the confidence. What happens if something happens? Do you think, oh no, I can't deal with it. I can't physically deal with it. There is just, to me, strength is confidence, knowing that I can deal with any situation that I'm facing, that I'm not concerned with how big you are or whatever you are, because I know that I could surprise you, once I get involved. So I don't have to, it rarely happens, but there have been situations where I'd be standing right in front of somebody. And remember one time, 3 big guys, I had them all around me, explained how they were leaving the gym, and they all just got up and they all left the gym. But I think the word that I just used is the most important one, and that is strength equals confidence. The stronger you are, the more confidence you have in yourself to be able to handle all kinds of situations. I've always believed that and believe it now.
Absolutely. You talked briefly there about Arthur Jones. I understand you had a pretty close relationship with him at one point. Can you talk about that?
Well, I had a relationship with him, a great relationship with him for a long time. I think probably the funny thing was there was a conference at West Point, and it was right after I bought my Nautilus equipment. And Jim Flanagan had told me about it. I said, I want to go. I wanted to see West Point. I wanted to see what their conference was like. Now, I didn't know Arthur Jones. I had never met Arthur Jones at that point. All I ever heard about him was Arthur is crazy. That's all I ever heard. Well, I was standing there, and Arthur was standing there, and these 2 guys were next to me, and they asked Arthur a question. And I watched Arthur explain the answer for the next hour. And I'm watching him, and I'm going, now I see why people think he's crazy. Because he has so much intensity, because he was intense when he was explaining this to these guys. That was my first meeting ever really with Arthur. But what happened after that was kind of funny. I got a call from CBS, which is one of the big networks, television networks, and they had a show called Good Morning America. And they called me up and they told me they were doing a story on Arthur, and they were wondering if they could come into my gym. I said, of course. So Arthur came in with CBS. Now, this is the first time I really had a chance to talk, quote, one-on-one with Arthur. Arthur could care less about CBS videotaping him. He never stood still. He taught me everything about the human body and strength training and equipment and design and form equals function, or function signs form, everything. And for 5 solid hours. And I remember it was on a Wednesday. Because he said to me, he goes, what are you doing tomorrow night? And I said, what do you need? He goes, well, I have to go up to Montreal. I was wondering if you want to go. And I said, sure. He goes, you got anybody you want to take? I said, yes. Now, here's the irony. On Sunday, I had taken my girlfriend at that time to Epcot, and we watched this whole thing in the Canadian Pavilion. It was old Canada. And it showed this beautiful flight going over Montreal in a plane at night, and they called Montreal the City of Lights. And I remember I said to her, God, it's so beautiful. We should go there sometime. Well, now this is Wednesday. On Thursday, we're flying over Montreal, the exact thing, and we Sunday. So that's where I even got a better opportunity, not only to get to know Arthur, but to get to know a lot of the guys from Nautilus. And it was funny because Nautilus was a very closed business, but they knew they could trust me. And I got right into the inner, and when I say the inner circle, I mean Arthur could speak freely to me about anything, and he knew that it wasn't going to go anywhere else. I had the opportunity to work with him all through the design of what were called the Nautilus tensiometers, which is where he had gone for like 287 days for about 8 hours a day, teaching doctors all over America about these new strength training tools. And at the end, he realized his tools weren't as perfect as he was saying that they had to be. I know he was so distraught at that point. A distributor from Texas was in town and asked Arthur if he wanted to sell it. And he said yes, and he sold Nautilus. Everybody thought he was out of the business. I knew he only needed time to recover. So one day I was out flying, and I decided I was going to go land in Arthur's backyard. He has a runway in his backyard. And I didn't know if Arthur would shoot me out of the sky or what. But I'm radioing in to see if anybody could hear me. This is no exaggeration. A jet fighter took off from the runway and came up right next to me. So I radioed, and he goes, who are you looking for? I said, I'm looking to see if Arthur's down there. He goes, who is this? I said, it's Joe Cirulli. He goes, oh, Joe, it's Chuck. He goes, yeah, he's down there. So I went down there and landed, and I went to the door and knocked on the door. Arthur comes at the door. He goes, come on in. Now, remember, I hadn't seen him for 6 months. And we went to his kitchen table. We sat there, and Arthur talked to me for the next 9 hours. And when he was done, he said, Joe, I figured out how to make one, but nobody's tested on it yet. So I went over to the Quonset hut that he had, where they had the machine and the engineer, and I became the first test subject for all the medical machines. And that was the beginning of medics. So like I said, I've been with him a long time. I was fortunately, when Arthur sold medics, and he was an old man, I went to see him at his house, and I would talk with him. And I said to him, Arthur, I just want to thank you for everything that you've taught me, for everything I've learned from you, all the different ways it's helped me and all. And I remember he looked at me, he goes, well, you're the only one who ever listened. And I said, that's not true. A lot of people all over the world have listened too. Definitely. So yeah, I had a great period of time, with him.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So that's nuts though. So he had his own staff could fly fighter planes.
Oh yeah. Well, they could fly anything. Remember, he had 3 707s. He took off. He had 2 pilots. Yeah, he had 2 pilots going all over America, picking up doctors, therapists, chiropractors, everybody coming into his ranch every day.
Wildlife at one point as well, right?
Well, kind of. He had 800 crocodiles and alligators. He had 100 African elephants. He had a gorilla. I mean, he had rhinos. He had everything. Snakes, everything. So yeah, he lived in Africa for a long time, and so he loved that world. But one of his planes was a cargo plane, and he had a couple of his pilots take off. They flew to Africa, and they picked up. I was there when they came back with the first 63 baby elephants, and then they went back again and got 27 more. So they were all on his ranch.
Very interesting man indeed. I wanted to just jump back into business for a moment. Currently there's quite a sort of fast-growing sector of what you call smart gyms. Gyms that are using machines like ARX and other high-tech gadgets, if you will, to kind of biohack the human body. I'm just curious. I don't. Well, again, I could be wrong. I don't know if Gainesville has that kind of equipment yet. But what is your thoughts about those types of facilities and that type of tech? Are you skeptical? Do you think it's interesting and that you might introduce it? Do you know the kind of thing I'm talking about?
Be a little more specific. I know a few, not all of them.
Yeah. So obviously you've got ARX, which is, are you familiar with the ARX machine? Yeah. Which is, I guess, adaptive resistance and motorized resistance, similar to, I guess, what the gravity machines produce in terms of stimulus.
But I know what it is.
Right. Okay.
It kind of, when you do the test, it kind of measures your strength curve and the designs to work out to go, which is kind of against the whole concept of a cam, right? Okay. I mean, when Arthur first started developing the cams, a lot of people don't know this, but how do you figure out the most perfect cam? Well, when you're first starting, you know that people who've been lifting weights, their strength curve, it's different, depending upon how you've been lifting. Most strength curves start out real low, then you go up to this peak point, and then you drop back down again. All right, so that may be what you are, but the question is that what you should be? Now, how do you figure out how to design a proper cam to be able to adjust the strength curve? Well, in the beginning, Arthur went into old age homes, and he would isometrically test all these old people. The reason why is they were just going to show what that lever arm, how strength changed through the full range of motion based upon no strength training. So that was the beginning of trying to figure out what a curve should look like. Now, when it got to the point of building medical machines, all of us guys had been training, and there was another way that Arthur came up with designing a curve. So I'll give you an example of the low back machine, because he didn't know what the cam should be on the medical back machine. There's only one way to find out. You build a machine that has a certain proportion from flexion through extension, right? Because you're going to be weaker in extension no matter what. So when there are a group of us who've been training for a long time, and we all tested on it, we all had different kind of curves. I mean, one was 5 times stronger, one was 7 times stronger in flexion than extension, and we had all these different things. So the question is, what is the right one? So what Arthur would do is he had a cam that had a 2-to-1 ratio. So we trained on that 2-to-1 ratio. And guess what happened? We all got a 2-to-1 ratio. Then Arthur said, let's change it to 1.8 to 1. So we did that. Then he said, let's change it to 1.6 to 1. And we got that. Then he goes, let's go to 1.4 to 1. And not everybody got there, but some did. They maintained they developed that relationship. So Arthur said that's the right relationship. And so if you look at the importance of a cam, it's to vary your strength at both flexion and extension, because typically people are going to be the strongest at the midpoint, but that doesn't mean you should only be strongest at the midpoint. So the question is, how do you adjust both ends to what they should be? And that's where he was a master, of developing that. So I've never been a big fan of following what your existing curve is, because you can raise the curve, but you still have that same relationship at the flexion point and the extension point. So that's my own personal feeling on, obviously, people who use that type of equipment to measure it. It works for them. But I understand a little bit deeper maybe than most.
Yeah, I think you probably do. Certainly do. I respect your opinion, and I'm just curious though. You've got, as I was sort of alluding to there, you've got I don't want to. Well, I mean, I could talk about specific tech. There's a machine called a VASPA machine, which is like high intensity interval training, but it does there's some other mechanism in play with that machine. There's cryotherapy, where people are put in these chambers and subjected to cold temperature and all of that. And then there's a bunch of other technologies which I need to learn more about. But there's a growing sector of what they call biohacking smart gyms that are investing in these technologies. Infrared sauna is another one.
Sure.
And they might have like an ARX, for example, which is for the stimulating the muscular system, and the majority of the other technologies are focused on recovery. And it seems to be a growing sector in fitness. There seems to be a lot of interest in it, and part of that is because people are getting obsessed with this quantified self movement, being able to see readouts on iPhones and Apple Watches of their health metrics. So, do you think you'll be looking into that for your own business in the future, or if you're not already?
Well, I mean, let me give you some examples.
Sure.
Some examples that we've used. I mean, we just brought in the compression gear, the pants and the shoulders and the hips. And, does it work? I don't know. But I tried it. It actually feels pretty good. And so, like I said, I think there's going to be a number of things that will work. So I'm not trying to be I'm not skeptical, of that at all. And I also understand, as you get younger and younger, the technology becomes more important, maybe more important than actually what occurs because of the technology, but it makes it cooler, right? So you've got those type of opportunities. I mean, part of these things are recovery. And I mean, there's a whole room that we have in the club. It's about 1,100 square feet, and we call it Chill. And we have 8 hydro massage tables that are in there, so that people who just want to relax and get away from it all for 10 minutes at a time. They can do 10 minutes or 20 minutes or 30 minutes, but it's their choice. That I think those kind of things are good simply because you see everybody running around, sprinting around, not just in the gym, but in life. And so we try to develop something that would give people the opportunity to kind of get away from that. But when it comes to recovery, I mean, in our pool area, we have a 55-degree cold plunge. So I'm not saying that's high tech, but it's very, very cold. But when I look at the whole realm of physical fitness and life, recovery does become an important part of it. So I'm sure there's more and more mechanisms that will be developed to help people recover. I'm sure there will be, I mean, if you look and see all the different virtual classes that are going on, when you see the use of technology and some of the, quote, higher, when I say higher intensity cardiovascular training type things, that's always going to keep growing. What catches on over time, we'll all find out. But I mean, like I said, I'm not against it. I'm into learning. I'm not rigid, like this is the only thing. So we'll just keep investigating and seeing what cool opportunities are out there.
Do you think that's a problem in high intensity training? Because you've got obviously a lot of people who are like, this is the only way, and they're not necessarily open to these other things. Do you think that's a problem?
Well, once again, when you talk to me, you're kind of talking to two different people. One is the gym and all the things we offer. The other is the X-Force Center, where it's extremely focused, on what we're doing. So I have both. I have both extremes. Like I said, my X-Force Centers are never going to have 28,000 people because we don't need 28,000 people. We can only manage 200 and give them high quality. So like I said, I try not to be in the gym so rigid about everything. I'll show you. Like I said, a lot of people, I'll show them how to do something right, and they'll go, wow, you're right. Because what I'll tell them is, do you mind if I show you how to make this a lot more miserable than you're making it on yourself? And then I'll show them, and they'll say, well, you're right. That is a lot more miserable. So, I will always have my beliefs, but I also try to stay open-minded that not everybody believes in exactly the same things, that I believe in.
That's so interesting. It's hard sometimes to hear it, right? If you're a real kind of high intensity training enthusiast, you want people to enjoy that torture.
Yeah, I know. I wish everybody did. Everybody doesn't, but I wish everybody did.
Yeah. Joe, I want to be respectful of your time. We've already run over, and I really appreciate you taking time out of your day. I just wanted to ask kind of one final question before I got your contact details and such. Any parting advice, any parting wisdom you want to give the high intensity training business owners that are listening to this?
Well, I think when you're saying the owners, the high intensity owners,
yeah,
Yeah. This is the one thing I learned about business. You got to treat it always like a newborn baby, and you got to give it all your time and attention. I've also learned you brought up the word in the beginning, successful. You can never think you're successful, because you can look successful. You can find people who look very successful who are not successful. They're going in the wrong direction. I can remember when I lived in my car, I said, I know to everybody else I look like a bum. I said, but I'm not a bum, because the other side of success is where you're going. So when the dreams are much bigger than where you are at that moment in time, to me, that's the definition of successful. And then you keep working on doing all the things that it takes, to get there. And as people who own businesses know, that means there's going to be times when you wake up at 2:30 in the morning because you got an issue that you're wrestling with. And you could get frustrated with the fact that you can't sleep because you're wrestling with this issue. And one of the things I've learned through the years, happens to me too. I'd wake up with an issue and I just learned, just lay here and just relax, because it's only going to be a matter of time before you figure out the answer. I've learned over and over, I could have major business issues occurring. I'd be waking up at 2:30 in the morning. I'd stay awake the rest of the night. And then all of a sudden, maybe 3 weeks later, I would wake up at 2:30 in the morning and I knew the answer to what I had to do. So it's something that, like I said, if you're new in business and you're wrestling with these, you can get all frustrated and angry. I've just learned, just accept it. And your brain will figure it out over time.
I love that. What is the best way for people to find out more about you, Joe?
Well, if you go to our website, it's ghfc.com. My email address is Joe.Cirulli, Cirulli @ghfc.com. So that's the easiest way.
Awesome. Good stuff. And obviously all of that will be in the show notes if you didn't catch that. And to find the show notes or the blog post for this episode, please go to highintensitybusiness.com/Joe, Joe. And for all episodes, please go to highintensitybusiness.com/podcast. And until next time, thank you very much for listening.
Discover how to achieve your health and fitness goals, become a great personal trainer, and build a successful high-intensity training business. Check out highintensitybusiness.com. highintensitybusiness.com.